Dear friends, respected viewers and subscribers, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is our traditional comprehensive daily situation report dedicated to the course of combat operations on the Ukrainian front. Furthermore, today we will definitely touch upon and analyze in detail the current tense geopolitical situation unfolding in the Middle East, as these events have the most direct impact on the global picture of the world. As of today, March 7, 2026, we have confirmed changes in the operational situation in the Slavyansk direction, recorded changes in the front line in the Krasny-Liman direction, and there are also certain successes in the Sumy direction. As for all other sections of the line of combat contact, for now we only managed to receive news reports without visual confirmation of large-scale advances. And before we move on to a detailed analysis of the situation, in keeping with our good tradition, I would like to sincerely and wholeheartedly ask you to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription, your likes and comments are the foundation upon which our work rests, and it is you, through your activity, who greatly help the development and promotion of the channel on the platform. Now let's return to our main theater of military operations, the Russian-Ukrainian front. In reality, the pace of the offensive is currently, well, let's be honest, not too encouraging. Russian troops are not yet spoiling us with global strategic advances. Perhaps a systematic, covert preparation for a major spring-summer offensive campaign is simply underway right now. At least Vladimir Zelensky himself stated this yesterday, apparently possessing some intelligence data or premonitions. And if we look at the retrospective at last year's March, then the pace there was also, as it were, quite weak. And then, starting from April, everything took off with increasing speed. Let's start our review today from the south, and we'll systematically move further north. The Zaporizhzhia direction. Everything here is very strange, confusing, and ambiguous. That is, look carefully at the map. On March 3rd, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced that the village of Veselyanka, this is the village I am showing, and as you can see on the map, it is far from the smallest size, with a pre-war population of just under 1,000 people, has come under full Russian control. At the same time, we have unfortunately not yet received any convincing footage of objective control confirming the physical presence of infantry. That is, there were frames of massive strikes being delivered, there were frames of tube and rocket artillery working on the village itself, there were frames of the work of UAV operators, but there were no frames with Russian fighters moving calmly inside the village, and therefore we are forced to put a big question mark here for now. Well, for the sake of fairness, I will also say that it is not always the case that when there are no frames from a village with Russian guys, they are not really there. It often happens that the secrecy regime does not allow publishing videos, but often the logic still works like this. When there is a confident presence, press services will show at least a couple of frames to confirm the success. Moreover, there have been no frames with Russian fighters even from the settlement of Rekhnoy yet, although its capture was officially reported back on January 30th. But, as far as I know from my sources, Russian fighters are indeed present there now. But due to the fact that the village itself is small and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine are equipped in neighboring larger settlements, there is no stable and safe control in Rekhnoye for this reason. At the same time, there are no Ukrainian forces there either, and for quite a long time now. So Rekhnoy is that very classic grey zone where it is dangerous for both sides to be. At the same time, of course, it is worth noting the strategic importance. If it were indeed possible to confidently take Veselyanka and advance further to the village of Zaporizhzhia, this would collapse absolutely all defensive positions of the armed forces of Ukraine to the south and would provide the Russian army with a rather solid, wide bridgehead on the path directly to the city of Zaporizhzhia. To give you an idea of the scale, right now less than 10 kilometers remain to the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, or rather to its administrative borders. 9 kilometers and 700 meters to be precise. That is, the army is very, very close to a major regional center. As for the Orakov direction, well, it is consistently without any significant results here. And we have already discussed and analyzed a bunch of times that this will continue without results until the Vostok, East group of forces, reaches the settlement of Kamenskoye. As for the area of responsibility of the Vostok group of forces itself, things are going quite well here. This group withstood a very difficult February and completed its task with an A+. That is, a serious breakthrough of the defense and a collapse of the front followed by a forced retreat from Guliai Pole was not allowed. And this was exactly the ambitious goal set by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, in his offensive, which was repeatedly reported by Ukrainian resources and insiders. Moreover, the Vostok Group not only heroically stood in defense, but continued to move west, switching to counterattacks, albeit at a slower pace, since part of the forces had to be transferred for the operational reinforcement of the northern sector of the front. Currently, what the guys from the field report, an active assault on the settlement of Zaporizhzhia is underway. This is another very serious fortified area of the enemy. There were 3 powerful fortified areas here in total, along which the new defense line of the Ukrainian army was built. These are Rozdestvenskoye, Zaporizhzhia, and Verkhnaya Tersa. The armed forces of Ukraine have already lost the settlement of Rozdestvenskoye, and now Russian troops are trying to finish off the garrison in Zaporizhzhia. The Russian army is attacking from several directions at once, both from the north and from the east. I personally have no doubts that the Russian army will crush them. The question is only about the time needed to suppress resistance. But I think that during the month of March, the Russian army will break through the defense here completely, as is already happening in neighboring Verkhnaya Tersa. And further on, the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine will be forced to line up along a new line, Lyubitskoye, Nikolskoye, Yemelnik. That is, the front will inevitably shift to the west by 10 to 12 kilometers after breaking this line. Not all at once, of course, this is not an instant process, but the simple fact is that the pace of the offensive will go much faster up to this new frontier, since the main fortifications will have been passed. Let's move a little further north on the map. From the Dnipropetrovsk direction, news is coming from both Russian and Ukrainian sources. Russian sources write that the statements about the capture of 200 to 300 square kilometers were greatly exaggerated, and the Ukrainian military did not actually take these 200 to 300 square kilometers of territory. Active offensive actions were indeed conducted by the enemy here, but Russian sources write that a peculiar black hole has formed here for the armed forces of Ukraine, where the Ukrainian command sends its personnel practically to slaughter without achieving tactical results. From the Ukrainian side, they write that assault actions are being conducted here in the direction of the settlement of Berezovoye, as well as in the direction of the settlement of Kalinovskoye, and currently these 2 settlements are key for holding positions by the Ukrainian army. Also, Ukrainian sources write that with the establishment of good weather conditions, larger-scale offensive actions using heavy armored vehicles will begin here. Since now, due to the mud season, Zaporizhzhia, armored vehicles simply cannot drive up to the front line. Armored vehicles are forced to disembark troops and personnel 5 or even 10 kilometers from the line of combat contact, and the personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine have to walk through muddy fields, through forest belts, which are being ruthlessly struck at this time by FPV drones and tube artillery. But it seems to me that armored vehicles will not radically solve anything here either. Even if the Ukrainian military begins offensive actions using armored vehicles, this equipment will simply be massively burned by experienced Russian FPV crews. Russian fighters who are directly on the line of combat contact in this section write that the front line is currently stable here, and enemy personnel are being stably destroyed. Offensive actions from the Ukrainian side have decreased slightly, but this is also due to difficult weather conditions, as well as a growing shortage of combat-ready personnel. Moving further north, in the area of responsibility of the center group of forces, there is also positive news. Russian units managed to take control of the center of the settlement of Novopodgorodnoye, and now fierce battles have shifted to the western part of this village. This is the Mezhevskoye direction for us. Here the offensive is not yet accentuated, that is, the forces involved are very, very small, without attracting large reserves, but even with such limited forces, it is possible to slowly shift the front line to the west. Plus, in the neighboring sector in the Donetsk region, it was possible to advance 1.5 kilometers in the direction of the settlement of Sergeyevka. Here, Russian stormtroopers took control of an important forest belt along the highway and two more forest belts along the perimeter. Well, in modern warfare conditions, this is quite enough to exert fire pressure further on Sergeyevka itself. Incidentally, only 700 meters remain to it from the current forward positions. And Sergeyevka, given its considerable size and tactical significance, is extremely important to take, of course, since it is impossible to leave such a large settlement in the rear or on the flank, where the enemy can calmly concentrate and accumulate forces. Let's move to the Slavyansk direction. Fresh video materials are arriving from the Slavyansk direction, and there are also changes in the front line and confirmed information. Let's start with the southern part, with the settlements of Privolye and Fyodorovka second. As you know from previous broadcasts, yesterday this section of the line of combat contact passed under Russian control. Today we managed to find additional information from this section of combat contact. All this territory, which I am now marking in red on the map, is under the confident control of the Russian military. Reports are also coming in that active combat operations are underway in the vicinity of the settlement of Minkovka, in the vicinity of the settlement of Novomarkovo, and in the vicinity of the settlement of Fyodorovka. Second expansion of the control zone is reported here. But for now these are preliminary data without visual confirming information. And there is interesting video material from this point. This video material was found on the social network Instagram. Here, servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation came under fire from Ukrainian formations while withdrawing from positions. The armed forces of the Russian Federation advanced in the Seversk direction by 1 kilometer and increased the zone of control along the line of Reznikovka. Pazenyu. This territory, all marked in red for you, is under the control of Russians. This territory was previously under Russian control, but today the territory marked in red represents refined corrections on the map. This territory did not pass under Russian control in the last 24 hours. But nevertheless, it was possible to confirm the increase in the control zone by 1 kilometer in depth here. Soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine love to post a lot of information on Instagram and TikTok, so it is often possible to accurately geolocate the real positions of Russian forces using their videos. It is also reported that Russian troops are actively and massively striking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of the settlement of Krivaya Luka, also in the vicinity of the settlement of Kaliniki and in the space between these two settlements. Here, the Ukrainian army apparently has echeloned fortification lines and defensive boundaries, which are exactly being struck by FPV drones and heavy artillery. Such is the news and changes here for today. Next, let's move with you to the Krasny Liman direction. There is news from the Krasny Liman direction as well, in particular in the settlement of Yarovaya. It was possible to find visual confirmations of the presence of Russian troops. Russian fighters hoisted the flags of the Russian Federation in the village itself. This indicates that Yarovaya is under the control of the Russian army, which is an important tactical success. In addition, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that the settlement of Sosnovoye has come under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And we managed to find information confirming indeed the expansion of the control zone in this settlement, right up to its western outskirts. Thereby, we draw unambiguous conclusions that Sosnovoye is also under the control of Russians, and possibly in the near future, assault actions regarding the key city of Svyatogorsk will begin if they are not already underway. If Russian troops take Svyatogorsk under full control, and I remind you that it is very, very difficult for the Ukrainian garrison to supply Svyatogorsk here, since all bridges across the river have been destroyed, pontoon crossings are also regularly destroyed, and the forces of the Ukrainian army are actually separated here by a water barrier, the Seversky Donets River, which flows here in a winding manner. And if Russian troops indeed take Svyatogorsk, take all these adjacent forest massifs under full control, then the strategic road to the city of Slavyansk will actually be under active fire control of Russian artillery. Here is where this supply road runs, and if Russian troops take Svyatogorsk, then there is a high probability that Russian troops will force the river and take the settlement of Tatyanovka, and this opens up direct opportunities to reach the settlement of Bogorodichnoye and naturally, subsequently take physical control of the supply route of the enemy's Slavyansk grouping. Now let's turn our attention to the Volchansk direction. News is coming from Volchansk today, but the news is the same as yesterday. Active positional combat operations are underway in the area of the settlement of Vilcha, in the area of the settlement of Volchansky Khutora, and in the vicinity of the settlements of Grafskoye and Simonovka. No significant changes in the front line have been reported from here today. The situation remains stably tense. Let's move with you to the Sumy direction. From the Sumy direction, materials are arriving that confirm the expansion of the control zone in favor of the Russian army. I remind you that recently, video material was received from this point. Here, Russian fighters expanded the control zone by 400 meters, and strikes were delivered against them by Ukrainian forces. Today, we managed to find information confirming the expansion of the control zone to the north of the settlement of Pokrovka. All the territory marked in red on the map has passed under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Here, Russian troops increased the control zone up to 1 kilometer deep from the state borderline. What else regarding the front? As for advances in general, that is all for today. However, there is one more important event that happened yesterday and which cannot be ignored. Remember, recently Russian aviation bombed a dam in the Osikovo area? Well, over the past day, with a powerful high-explosive aerial bomb FAB-3000, the Russian aerospace forces bombed another dam in the area of the settlement of Molokarka. There is a reservoir of the same name here. So unscheduled and very cold water procedures are now guaranteed for all dugouts and deployment sites of the armed forces of Ukraine here. All this is being done as part of the systematic preparation for the final battles for the city of Konstantinovka in order to disrupt the enemy's logistics and defense. If we take dry statistics by the numbers, then over the past day, about 7 square kilometers of territory have come under the control of the Russian army. Now let's dive a little into a deep analysis of the situation in the Middle East, because the events taking place there are truly of an epical nature and are changing the world. A week ago, the United States of America and Israel, cynically acting under the cover of ongoing peace negotiations, launched a sudden and treacherous strike on Iran. After the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was eliminated, as well as a significant part of the political and military leadership of the Islamic Republic, one could have expected a complete disorganization of the country's governance. A number of Western and independent experts had serious doubts regarding the stability of the Iranian state apparatus and its military organization in such a critical situation. They based this on Tehran's inconsistent and sometimes indecisive actions over the past 2 years, which began after the tragic death of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi. It was then that Iran decided to respond only half-heartedly and with restraint to blatant provocations in the form of a strike on its consulate in Damascus in April 2024, which killed one of the key commanders of the Quds Special Forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, and 7 other high-ranking IRGC officers. Of course, the Iranian armed forces launched a missile strike on Israel as an act of retaliation, but as is now becoming absolutely clear, they acted far from full strength then, trying to avoid a major war. The same thing happened after the daring assassination of the Hamas political wing leader in Tehran itself in July of the same year. In the autumn of 2024, Israel began a military operation in Lebanon against the Hezbollah movement, during which it achieved significant military successes and twice managed to eliminate its top leadership. The main pro-Iranian force in the eastern Mediterranean, which had been creating serious problems for the Jewish state since the early 80s of the last century, was significantly weakened, and it received a new painful blow in December 2024, when Iran, for reasons of its own, preferred not to help its longtime ally Bashar al-Assad, which contributed to the change of the political regime in Syria. Russia, under the conditions of the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine, physically could not help Damascus and was forced to negotiate with the new Syrian authorities. That is, starting from 2024, Tehran consistently surrendered one geopolitical position after another, and from the powerful, extensive network of pro-Iranian forces in the Middle East, created by the legendary General Qasem Soleimani, who was killed by the USA. By the way, I remind you that the order for his elimination in Baghdad in 2020 was given by none other than Donald Trump, ending his first presidential term. Only the Yemeni Houthis and various Shiite formations remained, and the not quite finished off by the Israelis Hezbollah. Why did the Iranian leadership do this, and what were they counting on by pursuing such a passive policy? The answer is now obvious. They were counting on a major compromise with the United States of America. In Tehran, they naively believed that it was possible to conclude a new deal with Washington on their nuclear program, the same one they signed in 2015 under the Barack Obama administration, and which placed it under strict IAEA control in exchange for the complete lifting of economic sanctions. Donald Trump unilaterally tore it up in 2018, and Joe Biden never renewed it. The entire message of the Iranian side to US representatives was formulated simply: let's agree peacefully. As expected, nothing came of it, since with the arrival of the second Donald Trump administration, the American side's strategic bet was placed on the complete crushing of Iran and the establishment of direct control over its richest resources. The alarm bell rang loudly for Tehran in June 2025, when, right in the midst of negotiations with the USA, Israel suddenly attacked Iran, and what is now known in history as the 12-Day War began. Moreover, Washington initially hypocritically stated that it had absolutely nothing to do with the Israeli attack, although a little later it unhesitatingly launched its own strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran's response against the American military base Al Udeid in Qatar was frankly weak, and the United States of America decided that the client was ripe for the final finishing off. Especially since starting from January of this year, Trump and his team switched to a mode of euphoria from the success of their operation in Venezuela. However, the basic instinct of self-preservation still worked for the Iranian leadership. It seemed that everything in 2026 was going according to the same scenario as before: threats from the USA, the deployment of American aircraft carriers, ships, and planes to Iranian borders, endless negotiations, and a treacherous attack right in the process. But this time, despite the heavy losses of the first day, Iran began to respond for real, toughly and uncompromisingly, and gave the American war machine a real bloody fight. And thereby Iran presented a unique opportunity for countries opposing the return of a unipolar world and US hegemony to achieve real success on this path. And this is indeed a real historical opportunity that all free countries should grasp. That concludes our eventful review for today. We continue to monitor the development of events both on the Ukrainian front and in the global arena. Thank you to everyone who watched until the end. Do not forget to like, subscribe to the channel, take care of yourselves, and see you in our next broadcasts.